So the Game Awards were just the other week, and Baldur's Gate 3 won Game of the Year. Congrats to Baldur's Gate 3 and the team over at Larian Studios for crafting such a perfect game. But how perfect is Baldur's Gate 3? It might seem pretty silly, but in all honesty, it's a genuine question. Some game developers on Twitter were trying to convince their online communities that no matter how perfect Baldur's Gate 3 is, it won't be replicated in the future to the same degree. Now, I haven't played Baldur's Gate 3 yet personally, but just watching gameplay and reviews, I mean, that is actually insane. It is definitely defining a new standard for AAA games, but don't worry, that's not the fear that these developers are having. There are very few game developing companies that specialize in AAA games, and these teams are getting insanely talented in recent years with what they have been able to achieve, especially with the certain restrictions that they have been given. But what even is a AAA game? Well, a AAA game is a game that is published and or developed by a mid to large size gaming company. Think 343 Studios, Activision, Ubisoft, Valve, and more recently, Larian Studios. All of these companies that I just named are mid to large size companies and are known for making what is now called a modern AAA game. So, what does a AAA game look like? Well, think of what games are big right now. No, not Lethal Company. We'll get back to Lethal Company in a second. Think Baldur's Gate 3, Spider-Man 2, God of War Ragnarok, Alan Wake 2, Elden Ring, Starfield. All of these games are huge, and that's sort of what defines a AAA game. If a game takes up more than 50 gigabytes of storage to install, it's probably a AAA game. All the games that I mentioned are highly coveted. Sorry. Most of the games that I mentioned are highly coveted. They are loved by fans old and new, loved by critics, and some of them can even be loved by non-gamers. But even with all of this love coming to the AAA gaming industry, it's still a dangerous place to take your game developing company. Now, you're probably gathering ideas on why I might say that statement, and you're probably right. Making a game takes a lot of money, and when talking in mass size per se, a AAA game, it starts to cost a lot more to fully produce. And a few of these AAA game development teams have already gone out of business by trying to develop such high demanding games, even if said game is extremely well received by fans and non-fans alike. If it doesn't blow up to ungodly proportions, there's a high chance that it will not break a profit. This is why it's so hard to get into the AAA game scene as a development company that's just starting out or only has a few titles under their belt. Getting into the AAA gaming scene as a game developing company isn't just hard for newer teams, but even for companies like Me Games. Yes, that's how you pronounce their name. They earlier this year released one of their only AAA style titles. While being adored by the fans of the company's games, it was the last game ever produced by the company because they later went bankrupt because the game just didn't make enough money upon release to keep the company afloat. It's sad to see all this hard work not pay off, but it's the danger of making a game as big as something like Baldur's Gate 3, for example. There has been a lot of AAA games released recently, and the release of these titles only seem to be speeding up as time moves on. It seems like a good thing that we are getting all of these higher production titles, which to some might be true, and that might be enough for a lot of you, but if you dig deeper, you'll find that just because there are a lot more big games being released doesn't mean that these bigger games are going to be successful in the long run, or even in the short run in a few cases. Starfield came out earlier this year, and with it came a lot of controversy surrounding the title. This was Bethesda's latest and greatest game, and if I'm honest, as not too much of a Bethesda title fan, it seems like Starfield let down a lot of the expectations that fans had surrounding the title. There was a lot of hype building up Starfield to be one of the biggest games of the year and maybe even farther beyond that. But if you were to look at the winners or even some of the nominations at the Game Awards, you would find that Starfield is literally nowhere. It only got one nomination. Now, this isn't just showing that Starfield wasn't the great game that fans and the trailers made it out to be, but it's showing the strength that the 2023 game releases had this year. So many games came out, and it's hard to recognize all of them at something like an award show, but the fact that it got only one nomination is still mind-blowing. Now, even though Starfield only got one nomination, Insomniac's Spider-Man 2 got nominated for 7 different awards, and still ended up winning 0. Spider-Man 2 is a very different case than Starfield, because people have been waiting for Spider-Man 2 ever since Spider-Man 1 came out back in 2018. Once again, I have not played Spider-Man 2 because I am not buying a PS5 for $500 just to play a single game, but it seems that Insomniac really nailed it with this one. Fans adored it and seemed genuinely surprised and upset when it didn't win a single award. The game's graphics are almost unmatched, only being beaten by a few titles this year. The score was incredible, and the story, like other Insomniac games, was one of the best of 2023, but it still was upset at the Game Awards. Now, hold on, let's go back to what I said just 20 seconds ago. Once again, I have not played Spider-Man 2 because I am not buying a PS5 for $500 just to play a single game. I feel like this is a very reasonable statement. Even if the PS5 sold incredibly well, there still isn't a crazy amount of people that own one, me included, even though it's been almost 4 years since it came out. It's still thought of as a luxury item, at least in my eyes. Recently selling 50 million copies, not everyone that buys a PS5 is going to buy Spider-Man 2. But why do I bring this up? Well, here's the thing. Everyone knows that games cost money to make, but not many people know just how expensive it gets to fund a AAA game. The details of how expensive it costs to make all of these incredible games isn't public information, but you could obviously make the observation that this was not cheap to produce. Now, just because the game costs a lot to make isn't a reason for why these games are so popular and adored. Indie games have been covered on YouTube hundreds of times in great depth, but I'm not going to just repeat the same point that you don't need a big team and an even bigger budget to make a successful game. Instead, I want to talk about one specific indie game that's been blowing up in recent times. Lethal Company has been one of the most talked about games in the past few weeks, blowing up on YouTube, TikTok, Twitch, basically every single platform that you can think of. Lethal Company is absolutely dominating the gaming space right now. This little $10 indie game made by a single person is selling better and retaining players better than the newest Call of Duty. Now that is crazy. A franchise that has millions and millions of fans is selling worse than this random indie game that really only blew up by word of mouth. But why am I bringing up Lethal Company and its incredible success? Well, if you've ever played Lethal Company, you would know that it's a ton of fun. The game is downright addicting, and if you can get a group of friends together, it's easy to see why this game is doing so well. The new Call of Duty, on the other hand, is almost the exact same thing as the past Call of Duty, and the one before that, and the one before that, and so on and so on. Sure, there are some differences between each release, but it's almost like the iPhone nowadays, where it's very minimal changes being made between each new release, but after a few years it adds up, and it starts to get worth it to buy the new Call of Duty if you've been playing the same one that came out, say, 3 or 4 years ago. Now let me be clear, I have only rarely ever played a Call of Duty game. I am not judging the gameplay itself of COD games, it's just that from what I've heard, the reasons to buy the newest releases have been getting lower and lower over the past few years especially. But with Lethal Company, it's a brand new idea. In a year with a ton of crazy high quality releases, Lethal Company has felt like a sort of breath of fresh air. In a market where single player games dominate the successful new releases and multiplayers stick to their tried and true, Lethal Company has managed to prove its worth in the market of multiplayer horror. Lethal Company hasn't only proved its worth, but it has also shown these development teams that to make a successful game, you don't need a crazy high budget, insane graphics, and a jaw-dropping story. Although all of those things help with making and sometimes even defining what we know as a AAA game, game development companies need to realize that the things that I just listed aren't crucial to make a good game. Lethal Company was made by one guy with what I am presuming to be a pretty low budget. Sure, the art style for Lethal Company isn't jaw-dropping like Spider-Man 2 or Alan Wake 2 or what have you, but the style is memorable in a way that isn't just, wow, look at the pretty shaders, I hope my computer can run this. It's memorable in a way that anything in a similar style will make you think, oh hey, that reminds me of Lethal Company. This just isn't something you can say about Call of Duty, Starfield even, and you can't even say that about the new Spider-Man. I mean, it looks amazing, don't get me wrong, but so did the first one, and the Miles Morales game. These games that I've mentioned also feel like a good chunk of their reasoning for being created in the first place is to make a profit. Let me just say this, Starfield did not need to be made. Sure, it might be a valuable game, probably I haven't played it, but it doesn't really feel like its story was that important, and it kind of has been proven by how literally no one talks about it anymore. And it came out this year. It came out just a few months ago. I feel like gamers and fans alike can come to the agreement that very little soul was put into the game to make it meaningful and memorable as an experience. Don't get me wrong, the game looks great, but it just seems, from what I've read online, that its story was quite mediocre. And if you didn't already know, Starfield is a single-player game, and the biggest thing that keeps players of a single-player story-based game interested is to either continuously update the game for the foreseeable future, or to make an interesting and memorable story. And in a time where games can no longer be remembered for crazy graphics, Starfield needed to have a story that could stand on its own, and it seems that Bethesda just couldn't do it. This is probably a big reason that Lethal Company is doing so well right now. Everyone can tell that the reason this game was made was not to make a lot of money, although I'm sure is a good-sized motivator for the dev, but to fulfill their vision for a game idea that they truly love. This just isn't possible for AAA games because the development teams are just too big for a few people's visions to be seen by everyone working on the project. Oh, what's this I hear? Oh, I haven't talked about... Elden Ring is a masterpiece through and through. Being the most recent Souls game in the franchise, Elden Ring did not disappoint anybody. I mean, I know, I just talked about how graphics that look good just to look good don't mean anything anymore, but come on. Elden Ring, to a lot of people, is one of, if not the best Souls game in the series. All the side quests feel like actual side quests, and not just many assignments that I need to do to progress. Every boss feels like a genuine boss. The soundtrack is one of gaming's best, and just the opening intro scene's graphics make me want to throw my controller at my wall just because of how beautiful it is.
What?
The point is, not all AAA games feel samey. Some, like Elden Ring for example, honestly feel new in a space where we have become so accustomed to these crazy well-produced games. I could talk a lot more of the AAA games that have come out within the past few years of gaming, but I don't want to waste anyone's time, and I think that my point has gotten across. A lot of AAA games nowadays have been quite lackluster in my opinion. They feel like they're only being produced to make a profit, and not for the passion of gaming. My prediction for the future of gaming is that more indie titles like Lethal Company, that are obviously showing off the developer or the development team's passion for gaming, will start exploding in recent times. There will always be a space for these AAA titles to thrive, as there is a very large community of people that just want to see the improvements that gaming can have, and they want to see where it can go in the future. But it seems like the world has been leaning into the indie side more than ever. Thanks for watching my short discussion on the future of AAA games and the insane future growth of the indie scene. I'll hopefully see you next week.
And let's all sing the song. We love the company.
The company.
The company.
The company.
Even if we die, we love the company. No one volunteers for this, but we are here. The